The night pressed heavily against the cracked window panes of the dilapidated cottage where Eleanora Blackwood had spent the entirety of her 17 years. Outside, the moon hung bloated and yellow in the sky, casting sickly light across the moors that surrounded their isolated home. Inside, her father's drunken snores rattled through the thin walls, a sound that had been the backdrop to her existence for as long as she could remember. Eleanora's fingers trembled as she folded her single spare dress into a small cloth bundle. She had little to pack: a wooden hairbrush with several bristles missing, a tarnished locket containing a wisp of her dead mother's hair, and a dog-eared book of folk tales that had once belonged to her grandmother. These meagre possessions represented the sum total of her life, and soon even they would no longer be hers. Tomorrow she would be sold. She knew this with the same certainty that she knew winter followed autumn. Her father had made his intentions clear enough earlier that evening, his words slurred but unmistakable, as he'd grabbed her by the chin, his breath reeking of cheap spirits. "You'll fetch a fair price, girl," he'd muttered, his bloodshot eyes appraising her as one might inspect livestock. "Pretty enough, despite your mother's cursed eyes. That silver hair'll make you stand out." Eleanora had said nothing. There was no point in protesting. Thaddeus Blackwood had never been a father in any true sense of the word. He was a brute, a drunkard, and now it seemed a man willing to sell his own flesh and blood to settle his mounting debts. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath her feet as she moved to the window, pushing it open just enough to let the night air brush against her face. The distant howl of wolves echoed across the moor, a sound that had frightened her as a child, but now seemed almost comforting in its familiarity. Beyond the moors lay Ravenscroft, the village where her father would take her tomorrow, to the tavern where, rumour had it, men from the cities sometimes came looking for young women to serve in their households. If she was fortunate, she might be purchased as a scullery maid. If not, Eleanora shuddered, unwilling to contemplate the alternatives. She closed the window and returned to her narrow bed, lying atop the thin blanket. Sleep would likely elude her tonight, but she needed what strength she could muster for tomorrow. As she stared at the ceiling, her unusual lavender eyes, her mother's eyes, the eyes her father claimed were cursed, filled with tears she refused to shed. Morning arrived with cruel swiftness. The journey to Ravenscroft was conducted in silence, the rickety cart jolting over the uneven path as Eleanora sat stiffly beside her father. She wore her best dress, a faded grey garment that had once been blue, and had plaited her long silver-white hair into a single braid that hung down her back. Her pale skin, which never seemed to tan regardless of her time in the sun, was clean scrubbed, and she had pinched her cheeks to bring some colour to them. "Remember to keep your eyes down," her father muttered as the village came into view. "Those unnatural things will lower your price." The Crow and Goblet Tavern squatted at the edge of Ravenscroft like a malevolent toad. Its wooden sign, depicting a black bird drinking from a chalice, swung eerily in the breezeless air as Eleanora's father roughly guided her through the door, his hand clamped around her upper arm. The interior was dim and smoky, the stench of unwashed bodies and stale ale assaulting Eleanora's nostrils. At this early hour, the tavern was sparsely populated, with only a few bleary-eyed patrons hunched over their drinks. Behind the scarred wooden bar, a corpulent man with a face like raw dough looked up at their entrance, his small eyes narrowing in recognition. "Blackwood," he acknowledged with a nod. "This the girl, then?" "Aye." Thaddeus shoved Eleanora forward. "Strong enough for work, though she's got a willful streak." The tavern-keeper came around the bar, circling Eleanora as though examining a horse at market. His gaze lingered on her hair, and when she accidentally glanced up, he started at the sight of her eyes. "Unusual that," he commented, "might make her harder to place, or might make her worth more to the right buyer," countered Thaddeus. "When's the next trader due?" "Tomorrow, most like, unless—" The tavern-keeper trailed off, his attention caught by something over Eleanora's shoulder. "Well now, speak of the devil." The tavern door had opened again, admitting a gust of cold air and a tall figure swathed in a black cloak. Eleanora felt the atmosphere in the room shift, the few patrons suddenly alert, watchful. Even her father straightened, his usual belligerent slouch giving way to something resembling wariness. "Lord Draven," the tavern keeper said, his voice pitched higher than before, "we didn't expect you until next full moon." The newcomer pushed back his hood, revealing a face that caused Eleanora's breath to catch in her throat. He was unnaturally beautiful, with features so perfect they seemed carved from marble, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and lips that curved into neither smile nor frown. His hair, black as a raven's wing, was pulled back from his face, emphasizing the sharpness of his features. But it was his eyes that held her transfixed. They were the color of burnished gold, with an inner luminescence that seemed to glow in the tavern's dim light. "My business couldn't wait, Giles," the man, Lord Draven, replied in a voice like distant thunder, soft, yet somehow filling the room. His accent was foreign, his words precisely enunciated in a way that marked him as educated, wealthy, and distinctly not of Ravenscroft. Then those inhuman eyes fell upon Eleanora, and she felt a sensation like ice water trickling down her spine. "What have we here?" he asked, moving forward with a grace that seemed impossible for his tall frame. "A new acquisition?" "My daughter," Thaddeus said, stepping forward, suddenly eager. "Looking for a position in service." Lord Draven's gaze flicked dismissively to Thaddeus before returning to Eleanora. "Look at me, girl," he commanded softly. Against her will, Eleanora raised her eyes to his. The moment their gazes locked, she felt a strange pressure in her mind, as though something were pressing against her thoughts, seeking entrance. She instinctively recoiled, dropping her eyes once more. A sound that might have been a chuckle escaped Lord Draven's lips. "Interesting," he murmured. Then to Thaddeus, "How much?" Eleanora's father blinked, clearly taken aback by the direct question. Well, I was thinking 20 gold pieces would be fair, considering—" "One," interrupted Lord Draven, reaching into his cloak and producing a single gold coin. It gleamed in the tavern's flickering light, more money than Eleanora had seen in her entire life. Thaddeus's face darkened. "One? She's worth more than—" "One is my offer," Lord Draven said, his voice still soft, but now edged with something that made the hairs on Eleanora's arms rise. "You may, of course, wait for another buyer, though I wonder how you'll explain to your creditors why you've not yet settled your debts." The color drained from Thaddeus's face. "How did you—" "1 gold coin," repeated Lord Draven, holding it between two long, pale fingers. "For the girl." Time seemed suspended as Eleanora watched her father's face, witnessing the rapid calculations taking place behind his bloodshot eyes. She knew what he was thinking. 1 gold coin would buy enough ale to keep him sodden for months, would appease at least some of the men to whom he owed money, and if it meant ridding himself of the daughter whose very existence had been a burden since her mother's death in childbirth. "Done," Thaddeus said, snatching the coin from Lord Draven's outstretched hand. Just like that, Eleanora's fate was sealed. Lord Draven nodded once, then turned to her. "Gather your belongings. We leave immediately." "They're here," Eleanora whispered, holding up the small cloth bundle she'd prepared the night before. Something flickered across Lord Draven's perfect face. Surprise, perhaps, or pity, before it settled once more into impassivity. "Very well." He turned toward the door, clearly expecting her to follow. Eleanora hesitated, looking back at her father. Thaddeus was already at the bar, ordering a drink, the gold coin visible between his dirty fingers. He did not look back at her, did not offer any farewell. With nothing left to hold her, Eleanora followed her new master into the grey morning light. Outside, a carriage waited, its black lacquered surface gleaming wetly despite the absence of rain. It was unlike any vehicle Eleanora had ever seen, with intricate carvings along its sides, depicting scenes she couldn't quite make out. The horses harnessed to it were massive beasts, their coats so dark they seemed to absorb the daylight rather than reflect it. A driver sat motionless on the box, his face concealed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He made no acknowledgment of their approach, nor did he move to open the carriage door. Instead, Lord Draven himself reached for the handle, pulling it open and gesturing for Eleonora to enter. The interior was luxurious beyond her imagining. Plush velvet seats, polished wood paneling, and small lanterns that cast a warm glow despite the daylight outside. Eleonora perched on the edge of one seat, her bundle clutched to her chest, as Lord Draven took the seat opposite her. The carriage began to move the moment the door closed, though Eleonora had heard no command given to the driver. "You're afraid," Lord Draven observed after several minutes of silence. Eleonora lifted her gaze to his, finding those golden eyes studying her with unsettling intensity. "Yes, my lord." "Good. Fear is appropriate under the circumstances." He leaned back, his long fingers steepled before him. "Do you know who I am, Eleonora Blackwood?" She startled at the use of her name. "No, my lord. I am Lucien Draven, Lord of Shadowvale Castle." He paused, watching her closely. "Do the local tales not speak of me?" Eleonora hesitated. There were stories, of course, whispered accounts of the lord who lived in the castle beyond the forest, who was rarely seen but greatly feared. Some said he was a sorcerer, others that he was something worse. "They say many things, my lord." A smile curved his lips, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too sharp. "Indeed they do. And what do they say becomes of young women who enter my service?" Her heart stuttered in her chest. They say such women are never seen again. And yet here you sit, sold by your own father for a single gold coin, on your way to a fate unknown." There was no mockery in his voice, only a statement of fact. Tears pricked at Eleonora's eyes, but she blinked them away. "I have no choice." "There are always choices, Eleonora, even when all paths lead to darkness." Lord Draven leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, what would you have done had I not appeared today? Would you have gone meekly with whatever trader purchased you?" "No," she answered, surprising herself with her honesty. "I would have run away at the first opportunity." His smile widened. "As I thought, there's spirit in you beneath that docile exterior." He settled back again. "You may wish to run from me as well, but I advise against it. The lands surrounding Shadowvale are inhospitable to those who don't know their dangers." The carriage had left Ravenscroft behind and was now travelling along a road Eleonora didn't recognize. The landscape outside the window was changing, the familiar moors giving way to dense forest, the trees growing closer to the road with each passing mile. What will be my duties at Shadowvale?" she finally asked, the question that had been foremost in her mind since her purchase. Lord Draven regarded her silently for a long moment. "That depends," he finally said, "on whether the potential I sense in you proves real or imagined." "Potential? Those eyes of yours are not a curse, Eleonora, despite what your father may have told you. They are a marker, a sign of old blood." His own golden eyes seemed to glow brighter. "There is power in your veins, dormant perhaps, but present nonetheless." Eleonora shook her head, uncomprehending. "I don't understand." "No, you wouldn't." Lord Draven's gaze drifted to the window. "We're entering the Whispering Woods now. I suggest you rest while you can. Shadowvale is still several hours' journey, and the night brings changes to these forests." As if on cue, Eleonora felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She fought against it, suddenly suspicious of the convenient timing, but her eyelids grew heavier with each passing second. The last thing she saw before succumbing to slumber was Lord Draven watching her, those golden eyes now definitely glowing in the deepening shadows of the carriage, and the hint of something inhuman in his perfect, beautiful face, something that whispered of ancient hunger and the patience of centuries. In her last moment of consciousness, a terrible certainty settled in Eleonora's mind. She had not been purchased to be a servant. Lord Lucien Draven, whatever he truly was, had other plans for the girl with silver hair and cursed lavender eyes. and as darkness claimed her, she heard his voice, though his lips did not move. "Sleep now, little witch. When you wake, your true life begins." Eleonora awoke with a jolt, her consciousness returning all at once like a plunge into icy water. The carriage had stopped. Outside the window, darkness had fallen completely, the night sky obscured by a canopy of ancient trees whose branches intertwined so tightly they blotted out the stars. "We've arrived," Lord Draven said, his voice cutting through the disorientation clouding her mind. She blinked, trying to gather her thoughts. Something felt wrong about her slumber, too sudden, too deep. "Did you—" she began, then stopped herself. "Did I enchant you to sleep?" He completed her question. One dark eyebrow arched. "Yes. These woods are not for mortal eyes to witness after sunset. Consider it a mercy." Before she could respond, the carriage door swung open of its own accord. Lord Draven stepped out first, then extended a hand to assist her. Eleonora hesitated before accepting it, struck by the unnatural coolness of his skin. As she emerged from the carriage, Shadowvale Castle loomed before her, a massive structure of black stone that seemed to swallow the very night around it. Spires twisted toward the sky like grasping fingers, and gargoyles perched along its battlements, their stone faces contorted in silent screams. The castle didn't appear to be built upon the landscape so much as it seemed to grow from it, as though the earth had birthed this monstrosity in some ancient, violent parturition. "Welcome to your new home," Lord Draven said, releasing her hand. "It has stood here for 9 centuries, though few in your village would know its true age. The glamours surrounding it ensure that travelers pass by without noticing, seeing only ruins where grandeur stands." A massive iron gate barred their path, its surface inscribed with symbols Eleonora didn't recognize, but which made her eyes hurt to look upon. Lord Draven approached it and placed his palm against the cold metal. The symbols flared briefly with an eerie blue light, and the gate swung inward with a groan that sounded almost human in its misery. "The castle recognizes its master," he explained, noticing her wide eyes, "as it will come to recognize you, should you prove worthy." They crossed a courtyard where strange plants grew, flowers that glowed faintly in the darkness, and vines that seemed to recoil as they passed. At the massive front doors, carved with scenes of battle between creatures Eleonora couldn't identify, Lord Draven paused. "Once you cross this threshold, there can be no return to the life you knew," he said solemnly. "The world of men will become increasingly distant to you, like a half-remembered dream. Are you prepared for that?" Eleonora clutched her small bundle of possessions tighter. "What choice do I have? As I told you before, there are always choices." His golden eyes studied her intently. "I could return you to Ravenscroft this very night. Your father would be most displeased, of course, and your fate there would likely be grim, but it would be a human fate." "And what fate awaits me here?" she asked, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. A smile ghosted across his lips. "That depends entirely on what awakens within you." With that cryptic response, he pushed open the doors, and Eleonora stepped into Shadowvale Castle. The entrance hall was cavernous, illuminated by floating globes of light that cast a soft blue glow across marble floors and soaring columns. A grand staircase curved upward at the far end, its banister wrought in the shape of intertwining serpents. Tapestries adorned the walls, depicting scenes from a history Eleonora didn't recognize. Battles between beings with too many limbs. Ceremonies conducted beneath triple moons. Cities that appeared to be built from crystal and bone. "The history of my kind," Lord Draven said, following her gaze, "recorded by our lawmasters over millennia." "Your kind," Eleonora whispered. Before he could answer, a figure emerged from a side passage, a woman so pale she seemed to glow in the dim light. Her hair, black as midnight, hung loose to her waist, and she wore a gown of deep crimson that contrasted starkly with her alabaster skin. Her beauty was breathtaking, but there was something predatory in her posture that made Eleonora instinctively step back. "Lucian," the woman greeted, her voice musical yet cold. "You've returned earlier than expected, and with a guest." Her dark eyes flicked dismissively over Eleonora. "Seraphina," Lord Draven acknowledged with a slight incline of his head. "This is Eleonora Blackwood. She will be staying with us." The woman, Seraphina, raised one perfect eyebrow. "Another of your projects? How quaint." She circled Eleonora slowly, like a wolf considering its prey. "Though I must admit, this one has interesting coloring. Those eyes—" She leaned closer, inhaling deeply. "And that scent. Old blood indeed." Eleonora remained still, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. Seraphina's proximity brought with it a chill that seemed to seep into her very bones, and beneath the woman's flawless features, Eleonora sensed something ancient and ravenous. "Enough, Seraphina," Lord Draven said sharply. "She is under my protection." A musical laugh escaped Seraphina's crimson lips. "Of course she is." She stepped back, her gaze lingering on Eleonora's face. "Welcome to Shadowvale, little witch. May you survive your education." With a rustle of silk, Seraphina glided away, disappearing through another doorway. "Who is she?" Eleonora asked once she was certain the woman was gone. "Seraphina is an associate," Lord Draven replied carefully. "One of my kind who has chosen to align herself with my household for her own purposes." "And what kind is that exactly?" Lord Draven studied her for a long moment. "You humans have many names for us. Vampire, Nosferatu, Strigoi, the Undying. None quite capture the truth." He gestured for her to follow him up the grand staircase. "We are the Sanguis Nobilis, those who transcended mortality in the ancient days, when magic ran more freely through the world." Eleonora followed, her mind reeling. The vampire legends were well known even in her isolated upbringing. Blood-drinking monsters who preyed on the innocent. Yet Lord Draven seemed far removed from those tales, more complex and ancient than the simple predators of folklore. "Then you drink blood?" "Yes." He glanced back at her, his golden eyes glimmering. "Though not as indiscriminately as your stories might suggest. We are selective in our feeding, and those who provide sustenance often do so willingly, in exchange for certain benefits." They reached the top of the staircase, where a long corridor stretched in both directions, lined with doors of dark wood. Lord Draven led her to the right, passing several doors before stopping at one carved with a pattern of lilies. "These will be your quarters," he said, opening the door to reveal a chamber far more luxurious than anything Eleonora had ever seen. A canopied bed dominated the space, draped in midnight blue velvet. A fireplace crackled with flames that gave off heat, but burned with an unnatural purple hue. A wardrobe, a writing desk, and a small bookshelf furnished the rest of the room, along with a cushioned window seat that looked out over what appeared to be gardens. "This is... and for me?" she asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "For now," Lord Draven confirmed, "the adjoining room contains a bath and other necessities. You'll find clothing in the wardrobe. I took the liberty of having items prepared that should fit you." Eleonora stepped into the room, placing her small bundle on the bed. Her meager possessions looked pathetically out of place amidst such luxury. "Rest tonight," Lord Draven continued. "Tomorrow your education begins." "Education in what?" His lips curved into that not-quite smile again. "In what you are, Eleonora Blackwood. In what you might become." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing. You are free to explore the east wing of the castle during daylight hours. The west wing is forbidden to you until I deem otherwise, and under no circumstances are you to venture into the lower levels. Do you understand?" "Yes," she answered, though her mind was already racing with questions about what might be hidden in those forbidden areas. "Good night, then." He closed the door behind him, and Eleonora heard the soft click of a lock engaging. She was a prisoner then, despite the gilded cage. Exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her, the events of the day catching up all at once. She barely managed to remove her shoes before collapsing onto the bed, sinking into its softness. Despite her circumstances, sold by her father, purchased by a vampire, locked in a strange castle, sleep claimed her swiftly, dragging her down into dreams filled with whispered voices and eyes that glowed like molten gold in the darkness. Morning arrived with the soft chiming of a bell. Eleonora opened her eyes to find sunlight filtering through stained glass windows, casting patterns of colored light across the floor. For a moment, she thought herself still dreaming, until the memories of the previous day came rushing back. A soft knock at the door preceded its opening. A young woman entered, carrying a tray laden with food. Unlike Serafina, this woman appeared fully human, perhaps a few years older than Eleonora herself, with a pleasant freckled face and auburn hair tied back in a neat bun. "Good morning, miss," the woman greeted cheerfully, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "I'm Marta, assigned to attend to your needs during your stay at Shadowvale." Eleonora sat up, pulling the covers around herself protectively. "You're human," she blurted out. Marta laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. "Last I checked, yes. Like you, I came to serve in Lord Draven's household. Been here 7 years now. And he hasn't... you're not a vampire?" Marta's smile dimmed slightly. "No. Lord Draven doesn't turn his servants, if that's what you're worried about. The transformation is reserved for those he deems worthy, and it's rarer than you might think." Eleonora slid from the bed, approaching the tray of food warily. It contained bread, still warm from the oven, a bowl of fresh berries, and what appeared to be honeyed porridge. "It's not poisoned," Marta assured her, mistaking her hesitation. "Lord Draven insists his human household staff be well-fed and cared for." "How many humans live here?" Eleonora asked, taking a cautious bite of bread. It was delicious, better than anything she'd tasted before. "About 24 of us, handling the day-to-day operations of the castle, cooking, cleaning, maintaining the gardens, the usual work of a great house." Marta moved to the wardrobe, selecting a dress of deep green. "His lordship asked me to help you prepare. He wishes to meet you in the library once you've eaten." As Eleonora ate, Marta chatted amiably, explaining some of the castle's routines. The human staff worked primarily during daylight hours, though several remained on duty through the night. The nobles, as she called the vampires, typically emerged from their private quarters after sunset, though some, like Lord Draven, could move about during the day if necessary. "How many of them are there?" Eleonora asked as Marta helped her into the green dress, which fit as though made specifically for her. 5 currently," Marta replied, brushing Eleonora's silver hair. "Lord Draven, of course, Lady Serafina, whom you've met, Lord Cassius, who rarely leaves his laboratory, Lady Isolde, who tends the gardens and rarely speaks, and Lord Thorn, the youngest, who serves as Lord Draven's right hand in most matters. And they all drink blood?" Marta's hands paused briefly in their work. "They sustain themselves as they must," she said carefully, "but Lord Draven has strict rules about feeding. No one is taken unwillingly, and no one is drained to the point of harm." She resumed brushing. "Now, let's have you ready. His lordship doesn't appreciate being kept waiting." Once dressed and groomed, Eleonora followed Marta through the corridors of Shadowvale. In daylight, the castle seemed less forbidding, though no less extraordinary. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating artwork and artifacts that spoke of distant lands and ancient times. They passed several human servants, all of whom nodded respectfully to Marta, and regarded Eleonora with open curiosity. The library occupied a circular tower on the eastern side of the castle. Its walls were lined with shelves that soared 3 stories high, accessed by a wrought-iron spiral staircase. Books bound in leather, cloth, and materials Eleonora couldn't identify filled every available space. At the center of the room stood a massive table of dark wood, its surface inlaid with a map of lands she didn't recognize. Lord Draven stood at this table, examining an open tome. In daylight, he appeared no less intimidating, his pallor more pronounced, the inhuman grace of his movements more noticeable. He wore simpler clothes than the previous evening, a white shirt open at the throat and dark trousers, yet he still carried an aura of authority that filled the space. "Thank you, Marta," he said without looking up. "You may go." The servant girl curtsied and departed, leaving Eleonora alone with the vampire lord. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, finally raising his golden eyes to her face. "Yes, my lord." "Good. You'll need your strength." He gestured for her to approach the table. "Do you know how to read, Eleonora?" The question caught her off guard. "Some," she admitted. "My grandmother taught me before she died. I haven't had much to practice with since then." "Another thing we'll remedy." He indicated the book before him. "This is the Codex Arcanum, one of the oldest grimoires in existence. It contains the fundamental principles of magic as understood by the ancients." "Magic?" Eleonora echoed, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. Lord Draven's lips twitched. "You accept the existence of vampires without question, yet balk at the notion of magic. Interesting." Heat rose to Eleonora's cheeks. "I've seen evidence of your nature. I've never seen evidence of magic. Haven't you?" He raised a hand, and one of the floating globes of light descended from the ceiling, hovering between them. "What do you call this, or the gates that open at my touch, or the sleep I cast upon you in the carriage? I thought those were abilities of your kind. Some are. Others are skills I've cultivated over centuries of study." The light globe floated upward again, at a flick of his wrist. "Magic exists, Eleonora, though it has waned in the mortal world. Here at Shadowvale, at the convergence of certain energies, it flows more freely." He turned a page in the ancient book, revealing diagrams of circles and symbols that made Eleonora's eyes water slightly when she tried to focus on them. "The potential I sensed in you, the power that sleeps in your blood, is magical in nature," Lord Draven continued. "Those lavender eyes are a marker of the Fey-touched, descendants of humans who mingled with the fair folk in ancient times." "Fairies?" Eleonora couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. "Those are children's tales, as are vampires, to most of humanity," he countered smoothly. "The Fae retreated from this world long ago, but their bloodlines remain, diluted through generations of intermarriage with humans. Most descendants show only minor traits, unusual eye colors, affinity for plants or animals, occasional prophetic dreams. But in some, the potential for true magic remains dormant, waiting for the right catalyst to awaken it. And you believe I am one such descendant? I know you are. I can smell it in your blood, see it in the aura that surrounds you, invisible to human eyes, but clear to mine." He closed the book carefully. "That is why I purchased you, Eleonora, not as a servant, but as an apprentice." She stared at him, struggling to process his words. "You want to teach me magic? Why?" "Because power such as yours, left untrained, can become dangerous to yourself and others. Because knowledge should be preserved and passed on. And because," his golden eyes held hers, "I have need of someone with your particular potential." Before she could question him further, the library door opened. A man entered, tall and lean, with tousled dark hair and eyes of such a deep blue they appeared almost black. Unlike Lord Draven, whose inhuman nature was subtle until one looked closely, this newcomer moved with an obvious predatory grace, his every gesture suggesting contained violence. "Thorn," Lord Draven acknowledged. "I didn't expect you until evening." "Circumstances changed," the younger vampire replied, his gaze fixing on Eleonora with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Is this her, then? The witch-child you sensed in the village?" "This is Eleonora Blackwood," Lord Draven confirmed. "Eleonora, meet Lord Thorn, my second in command." Thorn circled her slowly, much as Seraphina had done the night before, but where the female vampire had been coldly curious, Thorn's scrutiny felt invasive, almost hungry. "She doesn't look like much," he commented. "Scrawny thing, though I suppose the colouring is interesting enough." "Appearances can be deceiving," Lord Draven replied mildly. "What news brings you out during daylight hours?" Thorn's expression darkened. "Hunters. A group passed through Ravenscroft yesterday, asking questions about strange occurrences and nocturnal predators. They're headed this way." Lord Draven's face remained impassive, but Eleonora noticed his fingers tighten slightly on the edge of the table. "How many?" "5 that were seen, likely more. They're well equipped, silver weapons, crossbows with ash bolts. Professional." Thorn's dark blue eyes flickered to Eleonora again. "Perhaps her arrival has drawn attention. The timing is coincidental." "I doubt it," Lord Draven said. "More likely they were already on our trail. The disappearance of that merchant last month was careless." Thorn shrugged. "He saw too much. What would you have had me do? Not drain him dry and leave his body where it could be found would have been a start," Lord Draven replied coldly. "We've maintained our secrecy for centuries through caution, not impulsive killings." A tension filled the air between the two vampires, ancient power against raw aggression. Eleonora found herself holding her breath, sensing that she was witnessing something dangerous. Finally, Thorn inclined his head slightly. "What would you have me do about the hunters?" "Monitor their movements. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. I'll speak with the others tonight and determine our response." Lord Draven's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Eleonora and I have work to begin." Thorn's gaze lingered on Eleonora for a moment longer, something calculating in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Then he bowed, a gesture just short of mockery, and left the library. "He doesn't like me," Eleonora observed once he had gone. "Thorn doesn't like anyone," Lord Draven replied. "He was turned during a more violent era and sometimes struggles with the restraint required in modern times, but he is loyal in his fashion." He moved to a shelf and selected several books, placing them on the table before her. "These contain basic principles of magical theory and practice. You'll start with them while I assess your innate capabilities." Eleonora glanced toward the door where Thorn had exited. "Should I be concerned about these hunters?" Lord Draven considered her question carefully. "Not immediately, but their presence complicates matters. If they're who I suspect, a faction called the Order of the Silver Dawn, they're dangerous even to creatures as old as myself." He touched one of the books lightly. "It also means we must accelerate your training. The dormant power within you needs to awaken, and soon." "Why is my power so important to you?" Eleonora pressed, sensing there was much he wasn't telling her. For a moment, Lord Draven's perfect composure slipped, revealing something ancient and weary in his golden eyes. "Because, Eleonora Blackwood, a storm is coming that has been brewing for centuries. The hunters are merely the first raindrops, and when it breaks in full, I fear even Shadowvale may not stand against it without the particular magic that runs in your veins." He opened one of the books he'd selected. "Now, let us begin with the fundamental principles of energy manipulation. Place your hands over mine." Hesitantly, Eleonora did as instructed, her pale fingers hovering above his. The moment they connected, a shock ran through her body. Not painful, but intense, like plunging into a swift river. Beneath her hands, a soft glow began to emanate from Lord Draven's palms, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. "There," he said softly, his golden eyes reflecting the light between their hands. "The power stirs. Now we must teach it to wake fully before it's too late." As the light grew stronger, casting strange shadows across his inhuman features, Eleonora couldn't help but wonder what terrible necessity would drive an immortal creature to place such importance on the untested magic of a girl who, just yesterday, had been nothing more than a drunkard's unwanted daughter. And more troublingly, she wondered what price she would ultimately have to pay for the knowledge he seemed so determined to give her. The soft glow between their hands intensified, pulsing like a second heartbeat as Eleonora felt something stir within her. A warm current that seemed to flow from some untapped reservoir deep inside. It travelled through her veins, tingling at her fingertips where they hovered above Lord Draven's palms. "Good," he murmured, golden eyes fixed on the phenomenon between them. "Your blood responds quickly. Most with dormant abilities require weeks of training to produce even the faintest reaction." The light suddenly flared, becoming too bright to look at directly. Eleonora gasped as the warmth turned to heat, racing up her arms and spreading throughout her body. It wasn't painful, but overwhelming, like standing too close to a bonfire. "Enough," Lord Draven said sharply, withdrawing his hands. The light vanished instantly, leaving Eleonora swaying slightly, her vision spotted with after-images. What was that?" she asked, her voice unsteady. "Your magic responding to mine, more powerfully than I anticipated." He studied her with increased interest. "The Fey blood in you runs stronger than I thought. This changes things." "Changes what, exactly?" She cradled her hands against her chest, still feeling the echo of that strange energy. Lord Draven didn't answer immediately. Instead, he selected another book from a nearby shelf, this one bound in what appeared to be pale blue leather with silver clasps. "We'll need to adjust your education. This text contains more advanced principles that I hadn't planned to introduce until you'd mastered the basics." "You still haven't told me why my magic is so important to you," Eleonora pressed, finding courage in the wake of what she'd just experienced. "What is this storm you're preparing for?" The vampire lord's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "In due time, Eleonora. For now, focus on your lessons." He placed the blue book atop the others. "Study these today. We'll continue practical exercises this evening." With that dismissal, he strode from the library, leaving Eleonora alone amongst the ancient tomes and lingering questions. Over the next 3 days, a routine developed. Mornings were spent studying the increasingly arcane texts Lord Draven assigned. Afternoons, she explored the east wing of the castle under Marta's guidance, learning its layout and meeting the human staff, all of whom treated her with a mixture of curiosity and deference that made her uncomfortable. Evenings were devoted to practical lessons with Lord Draven, where she learned to summon and manipulate the energy that flowed through her blood. Her progress was remarkable, even to herself. By the 3rd evening, she could create small globes of lavender light that hovered above her palm, move objects without touching them, and sense the distinct energies of those around her. The cool, ancient power of the vampires versus the warmer, simpler life force of humans. "Your affinity is primarily for spirit magic," Lord Draven explained as they worked in a circular chamber he called the practice room. "The manipulation of life energies, consciousness, and the barriers between realms. It's rare and valuable and exactly what I had hoped for." "What other types of magic are there?" Eleonora asked, extinguishing her light globe with a thought. "Elemental magic, control over fire, water, earth, and air. Transmutation, the changing of one substance to another. Divination, seeing beyond normal perception into time and distance." He made a dismissive gesture. "All useful in their way, but spirit magic touches the very essence of existence. It can affect the mind, communicate across vast distances, even in its most powerful expressions, breach the boundaries between life and death." Eleonora shivered at the intensity in his voice. "And that's what you need? Someone who can speak with the dead?" A shadow crossed his perfect features. "Not precisely, but the principles are related to what I require." Before she could press further, the chamber door opened. Seraphina entered, her crimson gown replaced by a more practical black ensemble that nonetheless highlighted her inhuman beauty. Her dark eyes flicked dismissively over Eleonora before addressing Lord Draven. "They've reached the edge of the Whispering Woods," she reported without preamble. 7 hunters, heavily armed. Thorn wants permission to eliminate them before they come closer. Lord Draven's expression hardened. Denied. Direct confrontation will only confirm our presence and bring more of their order. They already know we're here, Seraphina countered, a hint of frustration coloring her musical voice. These aren't village superstitions, Lucian. They have tracking spells and detection artifacts. I recognized the insignia on their equipment. It's the Silver Dawn's elite faction. Eleonora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the castle's perpetual coolness. The tension between the two vampires was palpable, laden with unspoken history and conflicting priorities. "How long until they reach the castle?" Lord Draven asked after a moment. 2 days, perhaps 3, if the woods delay them as they should. Seraphina's gaze drifted to Eleonora again, more calculating this time. Is she progressing quickly enough? Will she be ready? That remains to be seen. Lord Draven turned to Eleonora. We're finished for tonight. Return to your chambers and continue studying the Blue Tome. Focus on the chapter regarding spiritual barriers. It was a clear dismissal, but Eleonora found herself reluctant to leave while crucial matters that might affect her fate were being discussed. What happens when these hunters arrive? What are they seeking? Lord Draven and Seraphina exchanged a glance that Eleonora couldn't interpret. Our extinction, Seraphina answered bluntly. The Silver Dawn believes all supernatural beings are abominations to be purged from the world. They've been hunting our kind for centuries. Then why not leave? Eleonora asked. Surely you could escape before they arrive. Shadowvale is not merely a residence, Lord Draven said. It is a nexus point of ancient power, a place where the barriers between worlds are naturally thin. If the Silver Dawn claims it, they gain access to energies they could weaponize against all magical beings. His golden eyes held hers, including those with fey blood. The implication was clear. She would be as much a target as they were. The thought sent ice through her veins, but it also raised more questions about Lord Draven's interest in her abilities. Go now, he instructed more firmly. We have preparations to make. This time Eleonora obeyed, leaving the two ancient creatures to their plotting. As she walked the darkened corridors back to her chamber, she became aware of a presence following her, a cool, predatory energy that her newly awakened senses identified before she turned. Lord Thorn, she acknowledged, facing the younger vampire who emerged from the shadows like a part of them taking form. His dark blue eyes gleamed with something between hunger and curiosity. You felt me approaching. Impressive for a fledgling witch. Lord Draven is a good teacher, she replied cautiously. Thorn laughed, the sound oddly melodic despite the menace that surrounded him like an aura. Lucian has always been patient with his projects. He stepped closer, and Eleonora had to force herself not to retreat. But I wonder if he's told you the truth about why he's so interested in your particular talents. He says my spirit magic could help against the hunters. A convenient partial truth. Thorn circled her slowly, reminiscent of a wolf sizing up potential prey. Did he mention the ritual, or the sacrifice it requires? Eleonora's heart stuttered in her chest. What ritual? Thorn stopped directly behind her, his cool breath brushing her neck as he leaned in to whisper, Ask him about the binding of souls, little witch. Ask him what happened to the last fey-blooded girl he brought to Shadowvale. Before she could respond, he vanished, leaving only a lingering chill in the air and a seed of doubt that took root immediately in Eleonora's mind. That night, sleep eluded her. She pored over the Blue Tome, searching for any mention of a binding of souls, but found nothing explicit. There were chapters on spiritual connections, on the tethering of essences, on the transference of life energies, all concepts that seemed potentially related to what Thorn had mentioned, but nothing that clarified the true nature of such a ritual. By morning, Eleonora had made a decision. If Lord Draven wouldn't volunteer the full truth, she would seek it elsewhere in the castle. And there was one place likely to contain the answers she sought, the forbidden West Wing. She waited until mid-afternoon, when the human staff were busy with their daily duties and the vampires were at their most dormant. With her heart pounding in her chest, she slipped past the ornate doors that separated the east and west wings, using a small pulse of her magic to disengage the lock, a skill she'd been practicing in secret. The west wing had a different atmosphere immediately, colder, more oppressive, as though the air itself were laden with ancient sorrows. Dust motes danced in shafts of muted sunlight that filtered through stained glass windows, depicting scenes of battle and sacrifice. Unlike the East Wing, with its warm woods and rich tapestries, this section of Shadowvale featured stark stone walls and floors, giving it the feeling of a mausoleum rather than a living space. Eleonora moved cautiously, her senses extended to detect any approaching presence. She passed several closed doors before finding one that drew her attention. A massive portal of black wood inscribed with silver runes that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. Unlike the other doors, this one hummed with power that her awakened senses could perceive clearly. She hesitated, then placed her palm against the wood. The runes flared briefly with lavender light, the same color as her eyes, the same hue as her magic, and the door swung inward silently. Beyond lay what could only be Lord Draven's private study. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with texts that looked far older and more ominous than those in the main library. A massive desk occupied one side of the room, covered in open scrolls and artifacts of unknown purpose. But it was what dominated the center of the chamber that drew Eleonora's horrified gaze. A circular platform of black stone rose from the floor, inscribed with a complex pattern of runes and sigils. 5 silver chains were affixed to its surface, positioned where the points of a pentagram would be. Dark stains marred the stone. Old bloodstains, Eleonora realized with a shudder. "I wondered when curiosity would drive you here," came a voice from behind her. Eleonora whirled to find Lord Draven standing in the doorway, his golden eyes unreadable, his posture deceptively relaxed. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens on that platform?" "You already suspect, or you wouldn't have sought it out." He entered the room fully, closing the door behind him with a thought. "Thorn spoke to you, didn't he? Always sowing discord where he can. He mentioned something called the Binding of Souls, and a sacrifice." Eleonora stood her ground, though every instinct told her to flee. "He said I wasn't the first fey-blooded girl you brought here." Lord Draven sighed, a surprisingly human gesture from the ancient predator. "Not the first, no, but hopefully the last, and the successful one." He moved to the desk and picked up a small silver object that Eleonora recognized as a locket similar to her own. Her name was Rosalind. She came to Shadowvale 50 years ago, a girl with eyes like spring violets and hair the color of autumn leaves. "What happened to her?" Eleonora asked, though she feared she already knew. "She died on that platform," Lord Draven answered bluntly. "As did Marianne before her, and Elise before that. Their blood had the potential but not the strength. Their magic failed at the crucial moment." Horror and betrayal washed over Eleonora in equal measure. "So, I'm just another attempt? Another sacrifice to be bled dry for some ritual?" "It's not that simple." For the first time since she'd met him, Lord Draven's composure seemed to crack, revealing something almost human beneath the perfect exterior. "The ritual is not what you think. Yes, it requires blood, fey blood, but not necessarily death." "Then what is it? Tell me the truth, all of it." Eleonora's hands were trembling, but her voice remained steady. Lord Draven set down the locket and turned to face her fully. "The Binding of Souls is an ancient ritual developed by my kind in cooperation with the Fae before they retreated from this world. It creates a protective barrier around a place of power, like Shadowvale, that prevents those with harmful intent from entering." "Then why not cast it yourself? Why need someone with Fae blood?" "Because the magic of vampires is fundamentally different from that of the Fae. We draw power from blood and death. They draw it from life and growth. The ritual requires both to create a perfect balance, a barrier that discriminates based on intent rather than nature. He gestured to the platform. One of my kind must channel death magic from this point, while one of Fey descent channels life magic from the heart of the castle. Eleonora processed this information, trying to separate truth from potential manipulation. And those other girls, they died attempting this ritual. They weren't strong enough to channel the necessary power, he confirmed. The magic consumed them, instead of flowing through them. His golden eyes held hers. But you are different, Eleonora. Your progress in just days exceeds what took them months to achieve. Your connection to the Fey bloodline is stronger than any I've encountered in centuries. Why now? Why is this ritual suddenly so urgent after all these years? Because the Silver Dawn has changed, Lord Draven said grimly. For centuries they hunted individual vampires, werewolves, witches, any supernatural beings they could find. But in recent decades, they've shifted their strategy. Now they target places of power, seeking to sever the connections between worlds entirely. His expression darkened. If they succeed, all magic will eventually fade from this world, even the dormant abilities in bloodlines like yours. The implications were staggering. Not just the extinction of vampires, but the eradication of all magic, all connection to realms beyond the mundane. "And if I refuse?" Eleonora asked quietly. "If I don't want to risk my life for this ritual? Then Shadowvale will fall," he answered simply. "The Silver Dawn will claim it, harvest its power, and use it to continue their crusade. And you, with your awakened abilities and Fey blood, will become their next target regardless." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken tensions and calculations. Eleonora's mind raced, weighing what she'd learned against her instincts and the limited options before her. Before she could respond, the study door burst open. Marta stood there, her face pale with fear, her usually tidy appearance disheveled. "My lord," she gasped. "They're here. The hunters. They've broken through the forest ward somehow. Lord Thorn is engaging them at the eastern perimeter, but he's outnumbered." Lord Draven's face transformed, the hint of humanity vanishing beneath a mask of cold fury. "How many?" "At least a dozen," Marta replied, her voice shaking. "They have silver weapons, and some kind of devices that glow blue when pointed toward the castle. Magic detectors," he muttered. "They've advanced their technology." His golden eyes turned to Eleonora, suddenly intense. "We're out of time. The ritual must be performed tonight, or Shadowvale falls." "But I'm not ready," Eleonora protested. "You said yourself the others trained for months before attempting it. There is no choice now." Lord Draven moved with inhuman speed to the desk, gathering several items and placing them in a velvet pouch. "Marta, take her to the heart chamber and begin the preparations as I instructed you previously. I must help Thorn hold them off long enough for us to complete the ritual." "Yes, my lord." Marta reached for Eleonora's hand. Eleonora pulled back. "Wait, you still haven't told me everything. What exactly will this ritual do to me? Will I survive it?" Lord Draven paused at the door, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "That, Eleonora Blackwood, depends entirely on your strength and on how much of your humanity you're willing to sacrifice to save not just yourself, but all those who dwell in the spaces between the mundane world and the magical one." With those cryptic words, he vanished, leaving Eleonora with a terrible choice: risk death in a ritual she barely understood, or face certain doom at the hands of hunters who would destroy everything magical, including the power that now flowed through her veins. The distant sound of combat echoed through Shadowvale's ancient walls, the opening notes of a battle that would determine not just her fate, but the future of magic itself. Eleonora followed Marta through winding corridors that plunged deeper into Shadowvale than she had yet ventured. The distant sounds of battle, shouts, explosions, and an occasional inhuman howl reverberated through the stone walls, each echo a reminder of the chaos unfolding above. "Did you know," Eleonora asked as they descended a spiral staircase, "about the ritual, about the girls who died before me?" Marta's face was grim in the light of the torch she carried. "Not everything, but enough. I've served Lord Draven for 7 years. I've seen his desperation grow as the Silver Dawn's power increased. And you still serve him willingly?" "I serve Shadowvale," Marta corrected. "This place is more than just a vampire's lair. It's a sanctuary for those of us who don't quite belong in the human world." She glanced back at Eleonora. "Like you." They reached the bottom of the staircase and emerged into a vast, circular chamber, unlike anything Eleonora had seen in the castle thus far. The walls were crystalline, seeming to pulse with a soft inner light that shifted through the colors of dawn. Rose, gold, lavender. At the center of the room stood a pedestal of white marble, upon which rested a single perfect crystal the size of a human heart. "The heart chamber," Marta explained, her voice hushed with reverence. "The nexus point, where all the ley lines that run through Shadowvale converge." Eleonora approached the crystal cautiously. As she drew nearer, it began to pulse with light that matched the rhythm of her own heartbeat. When she extended her hand toward it, stopping just short of touching its surface, tendrils of lavender energy, her energy, reached out from her fingertips to caress the crystal. "It recognizes you," Marta whispered. "That's a good sign." A thunderous crash from above made both women jump. Dust sifted down from the crystalline ceiling. "They've breached the outer defenses," Marta said, hurrying to a chest tucked against one wall. She withdrew several items, a silver chalice, a small knife with a blade that seemed to be made of crystal rather than metal, and a white robe embroidered with silver threads that formed complex patterns. "You need to change into this," she instructed, handing Eleonora the robe. "The silver threads will help channel and focus your energy." As Eleonora slipped the robe over her head, its fabric cool and strangely weightless against her skin, Marta continued her preparations, arranging 5 candles in a circle around the pedestal and lighting them with a whispered word that made Eleonora's newly awakened senses tingle. "You have magic too," Eleonora realized. Marta smiled faintly. "A touch. My grandmother was a hedge witch. Not enough to interest the Silver Dawn, but enough to make the villagers suspicious." She finished lighting the last candle. "Lord Draven found me hiding in a barn after my family's cottage was burned with them inside it." The casual horror of this statement, and the matter-of-fact way Marta delivered it, struck Eleonora like a physical blow. How many others like them were there? How many with just a touch of the extraordinary? Enough to make them targets, but not enough to defend themselves. Another crash from above, closer this time, followed by a scream that cut off abruptly. "We're running out of time," Marta said, her freckled face taut with worry. She pressed the crystal knife into Eleonora's hand. "When Lord Draven arrives, you'll need to stand at the crystal while he takes position on the other side. When the ritual begins, you must cut your palm and let your blood touch the heart while focusing your magic through it." "And then what happens?" Marta's eyes dropped. "I don't know exactly. No one but Lord Draven has witnessed the full ritual. Because the others all died," Eleonora concluded grimly. Before Marta could respond, a section of the crystalline wall seemed to liquefy, allowing Lord Draven to step through. His elegant clothes were torn and splattered with blood, some of it his own, black and viscous, seeping from a silver dagger still embedded in his shoulder. "The hunters have breached the main hall," he said without preamble, his golden eyes glowing fiercely in the chamber's soft light. "Thorn has fallen. Seraphina and the others are holding them at the inner sanctum, but they won't last long." With a grimace, he yanked the silver dagger from his flesh, the wound smoking slightly as it began to close. "We must begin immediately." "My lord, you're injured," Marta protested. "Will you have the strength to—" "I have enough," he cut her off, his tone allowing no further discussion. "Take your position at the door, Marta. Let no one enter until the ritual is complete, or all is lost." The servant girl nodded, moving to the chamber entrance with a determined set to her jaw. From somewhere within her skirts, she produced a small crossbow, already loaded. Lord Draven turned to Eleonora, his golden eyes searching her face. "Are you prepared?" No, she answered honestly, but I don't see that I have much choice. Something like regret flickered across his perfect features. For what it's worth, I never intended to deceive you. I merely hoped for more time to explain, to prepare you properly. Would it have made a difference? Perhaps not. He moved to the opposite side of the crystal heart, its pulsing light casting strange shadows across his inhuman face. You should know that once we begin, there can be no stopping until the ritual is complete or until failure occurs. Eleonora took her position, the crystal heart between them now glowing brighter, responding to their proximity. Will it kill me? Like the others? It might, he admitted. The magic we're about to channel is ancient and powerful. It will test your limits and then demand more. He extended his hands, palms up, on either side of the crystal. But I believe you are stronger than those who came before you. Your magic responds instinctively, naturally. If anyone can survive this, it's you. It wasn't the most reassuring statement, but Eleonora appreciated the honesty. She placed her hands in a mirroring position to his, the crystal knife clutched in her right. What do I do? Focus on the heart. Feel its rhythm aligning with your own. Lord Draven's voice dropped to a hypnotic cadence. When I begin the incantation, cut your palm and place your bleeding hand directly on the crystal. Then let your magic flow, not from you into the crystal, but through you. You are not the source, but the conduit. Eleonora nodded, focusing her attention on the pulsing heart. Its rhythm was indeed synchronizing with her own heartbeat, creating a strange resonance that she could feel in her chest. Lord Draven began to speak in a language she didn't recognize, guttural yet melodic, with syllables that seemed to shimmer in the air between them. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the chamber thickened, pressure building against Eleonora's skin and ears. The crystal's light intensified, shifting from a soft glow to a brilliant radiance that should have been blinding, but somehow wasn't. With a quick, decisive motion, Eleonora sliced her palm with the crystal blade. Pain flared briefly, followed by an odd numbness as blood welled from the cut, blood that seemed too vibrantly red, almost luminous in the crystal's light. She pressed her bleeding palm against the heart. The moment her blood touched the crystal, the world exploded into sensation. Energy surged through her body, a torrent of power so vast it felt like she was trying to channel an ocean through a pinhole. Her veins burned with it, her vision blurring as tears streamed from her eyes. Across from her, Lord Draven had also placed his hand on the crystal. His blood, black and ancient, mingled with hers on the surface of the heart. His golden eyes were fixed on her face, his expression tense with concentration as he continued the incantation, each word now seeming to resonate directly inside her mind. The pressure built, the magic swelling within her until Eleonora was certain she would burst from it. Images flashed behind her eyes, memories not her own, glimpses of lives lived centuries ago. She saw magnificent beings with pointed ears and iridescent skin dancing beneath triple moons. She saw battles fought with light and shadow, blood and magic. She saw Shadowvale as it had been when newly built, a gleaming sanctuary at the crossroads of worlds. And she saw Lord Draven as he had once been, a human man with golden brown eyes instead of metallic gold, his face alight with passion as he worked alongside Fey craftsmen to construct the very chamber in which they now stood. "Hold fast," his voice cut through the visions, anchoring her to the present. "We're nearly there." The magic had become a whirlwind around them, the candle's flames stretching to impossible heights, the crystalline walls resonating with harmonic tones that vibrated through Eleonora's bones. She felt herself beginning to unravel, her consciousness fragmenting under the strain. "I can't," she gasped, her knees threatening to buckle. "It's too much." "You can," Lord Draven insisted, his own voice strained. "Your blood knows this magic, Eleonora. It belongs to you as much as you belong to it." Something in his words resonated with the power flowing through her. Yes, this magic did feel familiar somehow, like a language she'd forgotten she knew how to speak. She stopped fighting against the current, and instead surrendered to it, allowing the energy to flow through her without resistance. The pain receded, replaced by a sense of expansion, as though her awareness was stretching beyond the confines of her physical form, encompassing more of the castle with each passing second. She could feel the battles raging in the upper levels, sense the hunter's determination and the vampire's ancient fury. She could feel the fear of the human servants huddled in hiding places throughout Shadowvale, and she could feel something else, a presence pushing against the edges of her expanded consciousness, vast and inhuman, trying to force its way through the thinning barriers between worlds. "What is that?" she gasped, her eyes meeting Lord Draven's across the blazing crystal. "The true enemy," he replied grimly, "the force the Silver Dawn unwittingly serves. They believe they fight to purge supernatural evil from the world, but they are merely pawns in a larger game." The presence pushed harder, and Eleonora felt the barriers weakening. Whatever lurked on the other side radiated malevolence so pure it made her soul recoil. "The Silver Dawn's activities have been weakening the boundaries between realms," Lord Draven explained, his voice strained as he maintained the ritual. "Each place of power they destroy creates another crack, another point of vulnerability. If Shadowvale falls, the breach may become wide enough for them to enter our world fully." Eleonora understood suddenly why this ritual was so crucial, and why it required both vampire and fey magic, death and life in perfect balance, creating a barrier not just against human hunters, but against something far worse. A crash echoed from the corridor outside, followed by Marta's voice raised in alarm and the sound of her crossbow firing. "They've reached us," Lord Draven said, his expression tightening. "We're out of time." The ritual was nearly complete. Eleonora could feel it building toward some culmination, but the crystal heart still pulsed with uncontained energy. The barrier wasn't fully formed. "What's missing?" she asked desperately. "What else does it need?" Lord Draven's golden eyes held hers across the blazing light. "A binding element, something to seal the magic permanently." His voice dropped so low she barely heard him over the whirlwind of energy. "A soul freely given." Understanding dawned with terrible clarity. This was why the other girls had died, not because they weren't strong enough to channel the magic, but because the ritual's completion demanded the ultimate sacrifice. The chamber door splintered inward. Marta fell through the opening, a crossbow bolt protruding from her shoulder. Behind her, figures in silver-embossed armor poured into the room, weapons raised. "Stop them!" shouted their leader, a tall woman with close-cropped grey hair and eyes like chips of ice. The ritual must not be completed. Eleonora made her decision in that split second of perfect clarity. If a soul was needed to bind the magic, to create a barrier that would protect not just Shadowvale, but the world beyond it, from whatever horrors waited on the other side. "Take mine," she whispered to the crystal heart, pouring her intent into the words. "Eleonora, no!" Lord Draven's voice seemed to come from very far away. But it was too late. The magic surged in response to her offer, the crystal heart flaring with blinding radiance. Eleonora felt herself being pulled into it, her consciousness separating from her physical form. The sensation wasn't painful as she'd feared. Instead, it felt like shedding a too tight garment, expanding into something vaster and more luminous. As her awareness merged with the magic of Shadowvale, she understood at last what Lord Draven had meant about the castle being a nexus point. From this new perspective, she could see the ley lines that crisscrossed the land like shining rivers, could perceive the thin places where other realms pressed close against the fabric of the physical world. And she could see the darkness gathering at those boundaries, pushing against weakened points, seeking entrance. With her consciousness now woven into the very stones of Shadowvale, Eleonora extended her will outward. The barrier took shape, not a wall, but a selective membrane that recognized intention rather than nature. Those who meant harm to the sanctuary or sought to use its power for destruction would find themselves unable to approach, their weapons useless, their magic nullified. In the heart chamber, her physical body crumpled to the floor as the crystal heart absorbed her essence. The hunters who had breached the door suddenly found themselves frozen in place, their weapons turning to dust in their hands. The malevolent force that had been guiding their crusade cut off from their minds for the first time in generations. Lord Draven knelt beside Eleonora's empty shell, cradling her silver-haired head in his lap, his ancient eyes bright with what might have been tears. "You foolish, brave girl," he whispered. "It didn't have to be this way." But Eleonora, now existing as pure consciousness within the magic of Shadowvale, knew differently. This had always been her destiny, not to die as a sacrifice, but to transcend, to become something greater than her human form could contain. She gathered the fragments of her awareness, focusing until she could manifest a ghostly image of herself before the kneeling vampire lord. "Don't mourn me," her spectral voice echoed through the chamber. "I'm not gone. I'm everywhere." Lord Draven looked up, his golden eyes widening at the sight of her luminous form. "Eleonora, the barrier is complete," she said. "Shadowvale is protected, as are all within it, vampire, human, and those in between." Her gaze swept over the paralyzed hunters. "Even them, though they'll find their weapons useless, and their hatred diminished the longer they remain." "You've bound yourself to the castle," Lord Draven said, understanding dawning in his ancient eyes. "Your soul anchors the magic." "Yes." Her spectral form drifted closer to him, "but not in the way you feared. I'm not trapped or suffering. I've become part of something greater, something I was always meant to join." With her expanded consciousness, Eleonora could now perceive truths that had been hidden before. She could see the loneliness that had haunted Lucian Draven for centuries, the guilt he carried for each failed attempt at the ritual, the genuine care he had developed for her despite his initial calculating interest. "You'll stay then?" he asked, something vulnerable in his voice that she suspected few had ever heard. "You'll remain with Shadowvale?" "I am Shadowvale now," she replied, her ghostly hand reaching out to touch his cheek. Though incorporeal, something of her essence connected with him, a warmth that made his golden eyes close briefly. "And I will need a steward in the physical world, someone to maintain the balance, to ensure the sanctuary remains true to its purpose." Lord Draven, Lucian, opened his eyes, understanding the offer implicit in her words. "I have failed at that task before." "No," she contradicted gently. "You preserved this place through centuries of darkness, keeping hope alive when it would have been easier to surrender. I've seen your heart, Lucian Draven. I know your true nature now." Around them, the barrier completed its formation. Throughout Shadowvale, the fighting ceased as hunters found themselves disarmed and disconnected from the malevolent influence that had driven them. The wounded on both sides felt their injuries begin to heal as Eleonora's magic, life magic, fey magic, flowed through the castle's very stones. "What happens now?" Lucian asked, still cradling her physical body even as he spoke to her spectral form. Eleonora's luminous apparition smiled, a hint of mischief in her lavender eyes that now shimmered with inner starlight. "Now we rebuild, we heal. We create a true sanctuary for those caught between worlds." She gestured to the stunned hunters. "Beginning with them. They've been pawns in a game they don't understand. They deserve the chance to see the truth." "And us?" he asked softly. "What of us?" Eleonora Blackwood. Her spectral form leaned closer, her ghostly lips brushing against his, in a kiss that transcended physical sensation, connecting them on a level deeper than flesh. "We have eternity to discover that answer, my lord," she whispered. "And I, for one, am just beginning to live." As dawn broke over Shadowvale, its light filtered through windows that had been dark for centuries. The barrier, invisible but impenetrable to those with harmful intent, shimmered like heat above the ancient stones. Within its protective embrace, vampire and human, hunter and hunted began the slow process of understanding. guided by the gentle but firm presence of the silver-haired witch whose sacrifice had not ended her existence, but transformed it into something wondrous and new. And if, in the quiet hours between dusk and dawn, Lord Lucian Draven was sometimes seen conversing with empty air, a tender expression on his usually impassive face, well, the inhabitants of Shadow Vale simply smiled knowingly and left him to his communion with the castle's heart and the extraordinary girl who had become one with its magic. For in the end, Eleanora Blackwood had found her true home, not as a servant or a sacrifice, but as the very soul of Shadow Vale itself.